Good morning, everybody. Welcome to webinar one of the first of two webinars exploring Queensland's expanded child safe standards. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the historical injustice of colonisation and dispossession on our First Nations peoples and its ongoing impact and legacies. We are committed to reconciliation, self-determination and opportunity for First Nations peoples as integral steps in achieving equality, opportunity and well-being for all Queenslanders. I am joining you from Meanjin, Brisbane, and respectfully acknowledge the Kyabra and Turrbal people and all First Nations colleagues and friends joining us online today. From the 1st of January 2026, Queensland's expanded child safe standards will apply to accommodation and residential services, including supported accommodation, community or social housing, and accommodation services provided by domestic and family violence service providers. The Reportable Conduct Scheme will be implemented by 1st of July 2026. So we have three lots of presentations this morning. We will be joined first up by the Queensland Family and Child Commission, or the QFCC, Kyabra Community Association, and the Australian Boarding School Association. And as I said, this is the first in a two-part webinar series designed to support your readiness for the phase 2 of the accommodation and residential services. And I would like to say that this workshop is funded by the Department of Housing and Public Works. So welcome to everybody and welcome to all our guest speakers this morning. We really value your time and energy for this webinar. Thank you so much. So I will welcome our first guest speakers. Welcome to Coco Tanilu and Jessie Renoff from the Queensland Family and Child Commission. The QFCC is the independent oversight body and regulator for the Child Safe Organisation Scheme in Queensland. The role of the Child Safe Organisations team is to help ensure that this important reform is implemented effectively and in a way that truly makes a difference for children and young people. This means that they are responsible for administering the Act, supporting compliance, monitoring performance, and taking enforcement action if needed. So a huge welcome to Coco and Jessie this morning. Thanks so much.
Hello and welcome everybody. Thanks Charlotte for that introduction. Just try and get these slides moving. Firstly, I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands of which we meet today. I understand that many people are across the state, but for where the QFCC's offices are, they're situated in Meanjin, and I recognise the Kyabra and Turrbal peoples and the lands that they have been caretakers of and custodians of for a number of years. I also recognise the elders past, present, and the young people that we are working towards to protect, the emerging leaders. I also want to recognise the crucial role that First Nations communities play, but also the organisations that work with First Nations and the individuals that are part of this journey in safeguarding our children. Without cultural safety, First Nations children are not safe, and we know that if we're not in a culturally safe environment, it's simply not a safer and more empowering environment for all children. For those who I haven't met before, my name is Tu'alawha Koko Tanielu, known as Koko, and with me I have my colleague Jessie Renoff, and we are advisors within the Child Safe Organisations team at the QFCC. So a bit of a background, and thank you for joining us in the journey to Queensland's child safeguarding. Throughout this presentation, we'll be walking you through the Queensland's new Child Safe Orgs Act. We'll explore what the Act means in practice, including the child safe standards, the universal principles, and the Reportable Conduct Scheme. The goal is to give you a clear understanding of the reforms and how they work together and how they support safer environments for children and young people across the state. Before looking at legislation, it's important to understand how we got here. The Queensland Child Safe Organisations Act 2024 was created in a response to the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. The Royal Commission exposed serious and systemic failures that allowed abuse to occur, be hidden, and remain unaddressed. It has also provided a clear roadmap for improving, including strong and enforceable child safe standards. These standards are designed to help organisations create environments where children are safe, they're also respected, but they're also empowered. This reform is not just about compliance, it's about a cultural shift and a cultural change. It ensures every organisation working with children understands their responsibilities and that they are supported to meet those responsibilities. All right, so QFCC is the oversight body. Our job is to make sure that the child safe organisations reforms in Queensland are put into place and they're put into practice that are in a way that is genuine and keeps children safe. So today we'll cover how we got here. Once again, it's the Royal Commission in 2017 that brought us into this Act, and then how Queensland's approach compares to other states and territories, while child safe orgs matters and for children's rights and well-being, not just about legal compliance. So as I mentioned before, in 2017, the Royal Commission released its final report. It recommended that the 10 child safe standards and be implemented in a nationally consistent reportable conduct scheme. These were designed to prevent abuse, create safer organisations, but also to ensure that better responses were in place when harm occurs. Since then, most states and territories have introduced child safe organisational laws, and Queensland has recently joined them, with a key difference. In Queensland, all organisations must also uphold cultural safety for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. This is called the Universal Principles of Cultural Safety. It applies to all 10 child safe standards and it guides the whole scheme and how it's delivered. The child safe standards and the reportable conduct scheme work together as one. They help organisations be proactive, prevent harm early, and respond properly when concerns arise. To understand why this reform matters, we need to recognise how common and how harmful child sexual abuse in Australia is. In 2023, Australian Child Maltreatment Study found that over 20% of Australians aged between 16 and 65 had experienced contact of child sexual abuse. 78% of those said the sexual abuse happened more than once. The Australian Bureau of Statistics, their Personal Safety Survey in 2021 to 22, estimated at least 195,000 Australians were sexually abused before the age of 15 in an institutional setting. These figures represent real people and real harm. Nearly 49,000 applications have been made to the National Redress Scheme created after the Royal Commission to support survivors of institutional sexual abuse. More recent data shows that the issue is ongoing. In 2023 to 24, New South Wales received over 2,000 reportable conduct notifications. That's a 19% increase. Victoria received over nearly 4,000 allegations to the oversight body. And while Queensland doesn't have any comparable data as yet, the risks are likely to be very similar. All of this shows that child sexual abuse is more widespread than many realise, and the effects of it all can last a lifetime. Children who experience sexual abuse are more likely to face mental health challenges, risky behaviour, long-term contact with health and support services. So when we talk about child safe organisations, we're talking about preventing harm now and preventing trauma that can impact a child's future. This reform is about protecting children's lives and their futures. So we have a complex system. There are many checks and balances in place across Queensland systems, all designed with the intention of keeping children safe. We have mandatory reporting reporting, we have police investigations, we have complaint mechanisms, risk assessments, quality standards, and regulatory frameworks. But each of these systems in each cog of the machine has its own rules. Each has its own threshold for when harm should be reported or investigated. Each is governed by its own privacy laws with different limitations on what information can be shared. Each faces bottleneck inefficiencies and sometimes outright failures. Each has its own set of challenges when it comes to reporting abuse, including reluctance, fear, and barriers that stop people from speaking up. And each is shaped by its own culture, which can either support or suppress efforts to keep children safe. So while the individual parts might be working hard, they're not always working together. There are also a lot of cogs in the machine, but right now they're not turning in unison. And that's what the Child Safe Organisations Act aims to change by providing a framework that brings these systems into better alignment, improving coordination, and ensuring we don't let these children fall through the gaps. The Child Safe Organisations Act isn't just about regulation. It's about an important step to keeping children safe in Queensland. It won't fix every single issue on its own, and it's not a whole solution, but it provides two strong tools for real improvement. These tools were recommended by the Royal Commission in 2017. They are the Child Safe Standards and the Universal Principle, and also the Reportable Conduct Scheme. Together, they create stronger safeguarding for all organisations that work with children. The Child Safe Standards focus on prevention, building safe cultures, safe environments, and capable staff so harm is less likely to occur. The Reportable Conduct Scheme focuses on response, making sure that all the concerns that are raised and allegations are handled properly, transparently, and with the child's safety as the priority. These two parts work best when they are connected. Prevention and response should inform the strength and strengthen each other. When combined, they have a power to lift practice, increase accountability, and improve child safeguarding across Queensland. Let's look at the legislation. The Child Safe Organisation Act creates one connected child safeguarding system in Queensland. It includes, as I've mentioned before, the Child Safe Standards, the Universal Principles of Cultural Safety, and the Reportable Conduct Scheme. The Act sets clear responsibilities for organisations, also known as entities, that fall under the scheme. The Commission provides risk-based oversight focusing on education, guidance, and support. Information sharing powers help identify risks early and respond before harm escalates. Enforcement powers are there, but consistent with the Royal Commission's intent, they are to be used after education, support, and capacity building is applied. Next, we'll look at what the Act means in practice, which organisations are in scope, when requirements start, and how the phased rollout works. What organisations must do to comply with standards, what the Reportable Conduct Scheme requires, and how the Commission will regulate, starting with support and using compliance action only when necessary. And then we'll also look at what tools and resources are available to support you to apply this in everyday practice. So looking at the legislation, the main purpose of the Act is very simple but essential. It is to protect children from harm, to support their safety, well-being, and best interests. For this to happen and to do this, the Act introduces three major reforms. The first is the mandatory child safe standards. All child safe entities in Queensland must follow the 10 child safe standards. These are based on the national principles and are now legally enforceable. Queensland also includes the Universal Principles of Cultural Safety for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, which applies across every standard. And secondly, a Reportable Conduct Scheme. This creates a clear process for reporting and responding to allegations of child abuse involving staff, volunteers, or other adults within the organisations. It sets out what organisations must report and how they must investigate. Thirdly, the QFCC will be as the oversight body. The QFCC is formally responsible for overseeing the whole scheme. Our role is to support organisations monitor compliance and take action when needed. There are key terms in this Act: child safe entities and reporting entities. Child safe entities, these are the organisations that either provide services specifically for children or operate facilities specifically for children who are under their supervision. Reporting entities these are a subset of child safe entities that have additional obligations under the Reportable Conduct Scheme, things like investigation and notification requirements. But we'll come back to this a little bit later. So what does it mean to be a child safe entity? Under the Child Safe Organisations Act, the child safe entity is an organisation that, as I mentioned before, provides services specifically for children or runs facilities for children who are in the organisation's care or supervision and is listed on Schedule 1 of the Act or is added through regulation. What counts as an entity, you may be asking? The term entity is broad. It can include incorporated organisations, unincorporated groups or associations, sole traders, partnerships, but the only time an individual is considered an entity is when they are running a business, such as a sole trader or partner in partnership. How do I know if your organisation is in scope? This is a common question we are asked. To check whether the Act applies to you, you can start by looking at Schedule 1 of the Act and if your organisation is listed. Check whether any regulation names in your organization's or service type. More detail and guidance and practical tools will be provided as we move closer to implementation to help organizations work out their status under the Act. What does services specifically for children really mean? This is another common question. Do services have to be only for children or to be in scope? The answer is no. Services specifically for children means the service is aimed at children or the service has special purpose or design for children. So even if it's for adult use, some services can be both for adults and children. But if part of the service is intended to meet child's needs, it can also be considered as a service for children. There are also services that may be focused on parents and carers, but actually designed to support a child's safety, well-being, or development. These services could be counted as a service for children under the Act. The key point is a service doesn't have to be delivered to a child to be considered a service for a child. This nuance reminds us that a service doesn't need to be delivered to children directly. They can be delivered for children and still come into scope under the legislation. It helps ensure children are protected anywhere and that the service is intended to benefit them. How do big or complex organisations apply the standard? Or how do we make sure that the standards are working in a large organisation with many different roles? The important thing to remember is that not every part of your organisation works with children in the same way. So your policies, procedures, and trainings don't need to be identical everywhere. Instead, they should be proportionate, meaning that the match of level for contact and risk should be proportionate to the types of roles you have. For example, staff who work directly with children every day might need more in-depth training or more detailed procedures than someone working in their back office function. This flexibility is built into the Act, and there's a reason for it. It ensures that implementation is both meaningful and practical, tailored to the nature of work while still delivering on the core intent and keeping children safe. The Act uses a very broad definition of worker. This is deliberate because organisations look different across the sectors. They come in all shapes and sizes. Some are large departments, some are small volunteer run. Workers don't just mean paid staff. Rather than restricting what the worker means, it includes anybody doing work for the organisation as listed here. They could be the employees, they may be volunteers. It may include contractors, consultants, and labour hire staff. Therefore, anyone engaged or has to do work on behalf of the organisation that works with young children will be considered. This broad definition makes sure that the rule applies consistently, no matter how big or small the organisation is or how the work is arranged. Child-safe organisational system. What do we mean by this? Now we've looked at the legislation, it's important to understand the bigger picture. When we talk about child-safe organisational system, we mean much more than just the rules or tick box compliance. It's about creating the system that is preventative by stopping harm before it happens, proactive, identifying risks early, and shared, that everybody has a role, government, organisations, workers, and community. This system includes the child safe standards, the universal principles, and the reportable conduct scheme. That this system involves education, support, and cultural change, cooperation between agencies and regulators with clear accountability when things go wrong. The goal again is simple, for child safeguarding to become everyday practice, the way organisations naturally operate, not only when an incident occurs. The Child Safe Organisation system is built on the principles of shared responsibility. This legislation isn't about completing checklists or meeting minimum compliance requirements. It establishes a network of accountable actors, each with a crucial role in creating safer environments for children. Within the system, the Commission has a clear regulatory and oversight role. Sector leads and enablers play an essential part in guiding, supporting, and building capability across the sector. And the child safe entities are responsible for embedding child-centred practices into everyday operations. The strength of the system lies in collaboration. The Commission works in partnership with sector leads and enablers who work directly with entities to support implementation. No single part of the system can achieve child safety on its own. Together, we are building high-functioning, responsive and preventative regulatory systems, one that places the safety and well-being of children at its core. And importantly, every actor in the system, including us, must model what it means to be child safe. What does it mean to be a child safe organisation? At its core, a child safe organisation is a place that consciously and systemically puts children's safety and well-being at the very centre of everything it does. It's an environment where children's rights and human rights aren't just acknowledged, but they are deeply understood and are upheld by everyone involved, whether they're staff, volunteers, or leaders. These rights are embedded into the organisation's policy, its day-to-day practices, and overall approach to working with children. Being child safe means genuinely engaging with children, listening to their ideas, their opinions, and valuing what they have to say. And importantly, it means using their input to shape decisions. Their voices are not just heard, they're acted on. It also means taking deliberate steps to reduce the likelihood of harm occurring in the first place. At the same time, it increases chances that if harm does happen, or if it's suspected, it would be identified early. A child safe organisation recognises and responds to any concern, disclosures, allegations, or suspicion of harm quickly, appropriately, and with the child's best interests at heart. These aren't just surface level commitments. They are embedded into the culture of the organisation, from the leadership team right through to volunteers, and everybody embodies child safety in their behaviours, their decisions, and their attitudes. Finally, a child-safe organisation understands that this work is never finished. It engages in continuous process of reflection and improvement, constantly analysing its performance, identifying opportunities to do better, making changes to ensure that children's safety and well-being is always prioritised, because ultimately being a child-safe org isn't just about ticking boxes, it's about building a culture where children truly feel safe, that they truly feel valued and empowered every single day. The Royal Commission made it clear that proportional responses to compliance should be a core principle of any regulatory approach. That intent has been built in directly to the Queensland legislation. As the oversight body, we are committed to upholding this principle. It's not only legislated, it's also consistent with how the scheme is being implemented across other jurisdictions. This framework illustrates how our regulatory approach always starts with informing, educating, and supporting organisations. That's where the majority of our efforts and our regulatory activity will be focused. Of course, we will enforce the law where necessary, but enforcement is the last resort, something we turn to only after reasonable efforts to build capacity and capability and support have been exhausted. Throughout this process, we're actively assessing and profiling the level of risk to children. When we identify concerns, we don't act alone. We proactively share intelligence with other key agencies, including the Queensland Police, Blue Card Service, and other regulators. And I will hand over to Jessie to take you through the next part.
You're muted, Jessie.
Oh, classic. One of those things. So sorry.
That's
The
okay.
joys of having multiple screens. Hello, everyone. My name's Jessie Renoff. I'm a proud Gubby Gubby woman. My mob's from Northside Brisbane. I'm going to be taking us through very quickly and very briefly the child safe standards and cultural safety. So now, of course, turning from the legislation, we look into the child safe standards and the universal principle. Obviously, these may not be new ideas for you all. They're based on the national principles for child safe organizations. So if you're already familiar with that, these are very similar, especially with the child safe standards. Universal principle might be slightly different, especially with the approach that other states have, but you may have seen them before. What the Act does do, though, is it gives these standards legal weight. This means that all in-scope entities and child safe entities must implement the 10 child safe standards and the universal principle of cultural safety for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. This principle recognises that cultural safety isn't an optional extra, but it's fundamental to keeping children safe and must embed across all child policies. Sorry, Siri decided she wanted to be a part of the presentation as well. In a moment, I'll walk through what it looks like in practice, but I want to emphasize that these standards, again, are not a checklist. They're a framework for cultural and behavioral change. They ask organizations to reflect, to improve, and to prioritize children's safety and voices in everything that they do. So, next slide, please, Coco. Perfect, thank you. So these are the 10 child safe standards. It looks a bit hectic here, but that's just because there's lots of words on there. However, when you really draw them down, a lot of your organizations will already be doing a lot of this work. So at the foundation of this system are the 10 child safe standards. Many of you, like I said, will probably have seen this before or would know brief bits and bobs around it. So to kind of give an overview, the standards emphasize strong leadership and a culture that truly centers children. They promote the importance of children being heard and having a voice in decisions that affect them. They address recruitment and screening, staff training and support, and the steps that organizations need to take to make both physical and online environments safer for children. And crucially, the standards embed a mindset of continuous improvement as that standard 9, because children's safeguarding is not something that you just tick off once and move on from. It's a cultural shift, it's a commitment, and it's a process of ongoing reflection and growth. However, to all of these 10 child safe standards, to the core of all of it is the cultural safety, as you'll see on the bottom. And you'll see it visually shown throughout all the different standards because it applies across all of the 10. It's a cross-cutting requirement that enforces the need to promote the inclusion and well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. Standard 4 and the universal principle provide protective factors for all children, especially children from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, children who may have a disability, children in out-of-home care, and for for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. Under Queensland new laws and these 10 child safe standards, along with the universal principle, they are mandatory for all in-scope child safe organisations. The legislation embeds the national principles but goes a step further by adding that universal principle as a unique and essential feature of the state safeguarding framework. Next slide, please. So like I briefly touched on then, meeting the obligations is not just a once-off and a tick box, it's a journey of continuous improvement. And that's okay, everyone's starting from a different place. However, everyone is on their own journey, and a lot of this work, such as those 10 child safe standards and the universal principle, is work that you're already doing in your organisation. It's just being able to name it and pinpoint it to a specific standard or principle. But for many, this transition won't require a complete overhaul. Organisations that already place children's safety, wellbeing, and the best interests at the heart of their work are likely to already be meeting a lot of these obligations under this new system. In fact, for some organisations, they already have a lot of strong foundations in place. If you've adopted and embedded the Blue Card Child and Youth Risk Management Strategy, for example, that's already a long way down the line to meeting the child safe standards. So this is a really important point, recognising and building on what already exists and using it as a springboard for further improvement and alignment with the new legislation. So as you can see here, these are the different phasing for child safe standards. Like Charlotte described earlier, 1st of January 2026 is accommodation and residential services. There is a specific reason as to why it's phased a bit differently. There's two main reasons for this. It allows that sectors that don't currently have a lot of strong child safeguarding frameworks a bit more time to build their systems, and it also allows us as the Commission to phase our work, first establishing the child safe standards system and then moving on to the Reportable Conduct Scheme as a separate but really closely linked phase of regulation. So if your organisation does operate across multiple sectors with different commencement dates, we encourage you to adopt the earliest relevant start date. That way you'll be best placed for compliance and you'll be reinforcing a strong commitment to child safeguarding across your organisation. Now, briefly going on to cultural safety, we've already spoken briefly a little bit about it, but it is increasingly vital to becoming a child safe organisation. So cultural safety, it's a word that's thrown out a lot, but it goes beyond cultural awareness or competence. It means creating environments where children and young people feel that their cultural identity is respected, welcomed, celebrated, and protected. Their culture should never be something that they set aside. It should be recognised as central to their safety and well-being. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and for children of cultural difference backgrounds, cultural safety can be really closely tied to our identity, to belonging, healing, and different things around colonisation. However, cultural safety applies to all children. It acknowledges the importance of culture, language, religion, gender identity, disability, and lived experience. So organisations must do more than simply recognise diversity. Cultural safety needs to be embedded in policies and environments and decision-making and the relationships that we have with children and their families. And importantly, we must listen to children and the communities we support to understand what cultural safety looks like and means from their perspective. So this is not just an optional, it is a core component of child safeguarding. These next slides I'll just present up for a second, but with child safeguarding and child safe organisations, all of this work should be done in consultation and in collaboration with First Nations people. We always say that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people must define and measure cultural safety for themselves, as this principle is a non-negotiable. We know that achieving cultural safety requires individuals at every level of an organisation to develop the skills, knowledge and attitude to fully recognise and actively address cultural safety, address racism and address discrimination. And finally, we know that cultural safety isn't just about changing people, it's about a cultural shift. It's about transforming systems with the goal being to reshape organisations and services so that they genuinely work better for all children, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, families and their communities. This will be a journey of learning, listening and continuous improvement, and we're committing to doing that work all together. These are some of our cultural safety indicators. I won't go through all of them, but we'll be able to provide these slides after so you can have a little bit further of a read of these indicators. As you can tell that there's lots of different things, such as transformational unlearning, there's things around power, there's things about resourcing, as well as just working on ways of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander terms of reference. I'll go to the next slide to briefly pass us on. But why is cultural safety really important? We talk about it a lot, but do really want to fully recognize that obviously cultural safety is super important. But because it is a missed opportunity, it can actually create harm. It has a lack of cultural safety, creates barriers that makes it harder for children to engage with services and speak up. Perfect. It inhibits disclosure and it makes it less likely that children will be able to access the support they need when they need it. This makes it vitally important to ensure that services provide culturally safe environments. If this occurs, there is more potential for sustained engagement with First Nations children and families, and that will mean that we deliver better health outcomes and contribute to better life outcomes. This is why embedding cultural safety isn't optional, it's essential, it's a safeguard, a right, and a critical part of any effective child safe organisation. Just want to flag, know that we're kind of at our time now, Charlotte. Do you want us to continue going on or we can?
We've got some time set aside for some Q&A with both of you. So it depends how much longer you have, how many more slides that you have to present.
Well, we can briefly go into the reportable conduct scheme as well. I just noticed that we can bring the slides back up to do those last little bits on reportable conduct scheme. If there's any questions we don't get to right now, feel free to add them in the chat. We'll be here for the whole time and more than happy to take any questions on noticing.
That sounds good, Jessie. Yeah. So for people who are wondering, have a burning question right now, please feel free to pop it in the chat. And whilst the rest of the webinar's going on, Jessie and Coco can have a look at those. And I just want to flag too, our second webinar in this series will be going into more detail about the reportable conduct scheme. So it'll be highlighted now, but you know, because it's not taking effect until July next year, we can leave that to explore further in the second webinar. But yes, over to you, Jessie, if you want to keep going and tell us a little bit.
Thank you so much. Coco, I'll pass back over to you, and if you can represent the slides again, that will be perfect.
Oh, didn't realise I had dropped off. Apologies, people. All right, so just a quick look at the reportable conduct scheme. Up to now, we've talked about the proactive, preventative elements of child safe systems and the measures in place to get that moving. This scheme plays a critical role in ensuring that allegations of harm, especially those involving workers or volunteers, are taken seriously, investigated properly, and addressed in a way that upholds children's safety and rights. It supports a cultural transparency, accountability, and continuous learning, even when things go wrong. So let's have a look at what this means in practice. The term reportable conduct refers to specific types of behaviours involving a worker that may pose risk to children's safety or well-being. You'll see examples listed on the screen. These are foundations of what must be reported under the scheme. There are two important categories within the reportable conduct. This is the reportable allegation, an allegation that a worker has engaged in any type of behaviours listed here, regardless of whether the allegation has been proven. And then there is the reportable conviction. This is where a worker has been found guilty of an offence under the state or Commonwealth law that may involve reportable conduct as listed here. As you can imagine, this brings about an important judgment call. Part of our role as the regulator will be to help organisations navigate this space, particularly when determining when a concern reaches threshold that requires a report to us under the scheme, or whether it meets criminal threshold requiring referral to police. We'll be providing guidance and support as to help organisations apply these thresholds confidently and consistently in the next coming months. So how it will work, this will bring us to some real world challenges and anticipating the move to the start of the commencement of this scheme. So first I want to touch on the idea of integration. One of the key benefits of this scheme is that we identify the risks involved through individual investigations. They won't sit in isolation, but they will reveal patterns of broader issues within an organisation or the culture or their system. That means that we'll have an opportunity to not just respond to the individual incident, but we'll also be able to use the information to drive change across the organisation and potentially across the entire child safe system. But along those opportunities, we're preparing for a number of challenges. We're expecting high volume of reportable conduct notifications coming into the Commission, particularly in the early days of implementation. At the same time, we're also aware that some child safe organisations may not have strong internal capability when it comes to conducting investigation. That's going to be crucial in an area for support and capacity building. We also anticipate some tension in how investigations are shared across the regulatory landscapes. In some cases, the regulators may be reluctant to take on an investigation or lead the investigation. In others, there might be too many investigations running in parallel. Either way, it's a coordination issue and something we're going to need clearer protocols and relationship management to manage. There's also the risk of some organisations being hesitant to make reports under the scheme. That hesitation could stem from uncertainty about thresholds, fear about reputational damage, or simply a lack of understanding about what constitutes reportable conduct. Our role is to provide guidance and a reassurance that organisations feel supported to do the right thing. And finally, we know when harm does occur, the response is often involving a number of agencies, whether it's Child Safety, Queensland Police or other regulators. Bringing those agencies together to coordinate in a timely manner will be essential to protecting children, but also to manage complex and sometimes challenging environments. As we move towards commencement, the Commission will be releasing more guides, practical tools to help organisations. So these will be the reporting entities as listed in Schedule 2 of the Act, which it also includes accommodation and residential services. This is a scenario, very fictional, but may help you understand where things sit in terms of the child safe standards and the reportable conduct scheme. So thinking about accommodation and residential services, they are different from most other environments. For many of the young people, this is their home. They live there 24/7. Things can change quickly. Relationships can be part of that day-to-day life, or non-existent relationships, and having to build those on a daily basis can cause a bit of anxiety. Because of this, safety isn't just about building. It's about how young people feel, how they feel emotionally, culturally, and in their everyday routine. We're looking at how child safe standards might show up in a place like this, as in this Karuna house. This example won't match every situation, but the ideas and lessons can still be used or adapted into your own service. So what this scenario covers is a young person aged 12 to 18 with different cultural backgrounds, staff working rostered shifts with a mix of experience. In their daily life, they're thinking about meals, homework, appointments, and activities. There are some common challenges around building relationships, setting boundaries, and supporting young people with higher needs. So in terms of the child safe standards, with leadership and culture, it could be looking at how child safety isn't just about putting a poster up. It's about how you talk to young people and how rules are applied, when those decisions are made and how they're explained. Young people can quickly tell if the environment is respectful or harsh. In terms of Standard 3, perhaps it's where it's focused on family and community engagement. Family still matters, even when a young person enters a residential care. When it's safe and appropriate, involving family and kin may help build trust and make transitions easier. For First Nations people, this can include elders, extended family, and cultural leaders, but it also could include acknowledging that they may not be on home ground. For standard 5 and 7, it could be looking at the skills and the support of staff and what any gaps in that knowledge and how they could be supported further. Staff also need reflective supervision to manage the emotional demand of the work. So they may be some examples in terms of that. Some reflective questions you could be asking your team is, how do young people influence daily routines in your service? What does cultural safety look like in everyday activities? And just to summarise, this is just a scenario that might help you understand the child safe standards. It's not an extra task, but can be embedded into day-to-day activities within the home. All right, so quickly, just to touch on some resources and tools we have available. There are a number of practical steps your organisation can start taking now to prepare for child safe standards and the Reportable Conduct Scheme. Firstly, it's really important you understand your obligation and the timeframes that apply for you. Different organisations will be at different stages of readiness and will have different deadlines, so getting a clear sense of where you sit on that timeline is a great place to start. Then it's learning about the 10 child safe standards and the universal principles. It's also good to have, it's also a good idea to identify someone within your organisation who can champion the change, as well as the people who would take on the direct implementation of tasks. We understand that resources are tight in some organisations. This might naturally fall into specific role or functions, but depending on how your organisation sits, you may need to draw on multiple people to provide input and assist. Having a dedicated person to oversee the work, liaise with leadership, documents in progress, and keep things moving can make a big difference. Make sure you stay in the loop with us and subscribe to the Commission's newsletter and keep up to date with the resources and deadlines as guidance become available. So this is what we've got available online, and you'll be able to find that. We highly recommend having a look at the quick reference guide, and there'll be some more information, as we mentioned earlier, about the regulatory approach coming out. More info via this website, the QFCC, and if you hit on the resource, Child Safe resource link, you'll be able to find that. And if you have any questions or queries that stand out, feel free to email us on the email available there. And apologies for taking us over time, but thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Coco, and thank you to you too, Jessie. We've got some questions, as you can see, coming through on the chat now. And Jessie's also mentioned the inquiries at qfcc.qrd.gov.au email address to would be good for everybody to take down if you haven't already. Yeah, so I'll feel free to keep the questions coming through to the chat there, and Jessie and Coco will do their best to help everybody. And as I mentioned in the chat, there'll also be an email coming out after this webinar with the copy of the recording of this session and some other resources for you all as well. Alrighty, so we're moving on to our second guest speakers. We are joined by Diane Hughes from the Kyabra Community Association. Kyabra is a community-based organisation committed to strengthening individual, family and community life. It was established in 1976 as Sunnybank Family Support. Kyabra continues to provide support and training to thousands of individuals, families and community groups on the south side of Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast. Diane is joined as well by Vicky Carrick, who, among other things, works in a consultancy capacity for community organisations and government. Vicky will talk through some of the learnings from her work with Kyabra. So please join me in welcoming Diane and Vicky this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'm just going to share my window. How's that?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Thank you for that, and thank you for all of that information, Coco and Jessie. That's really informative and so comprehensive. Really appreciate that. I would just like to, before I commence, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work and live and where I'm coming from today, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. I recognise their connection to land, water and community, and I believe that cultural recognition is an important part of the reconciliation process. And I also recognise that sovereignty of their land was never ceded. Just a little bit of introduction about myself. I'm the General Manager of Quality Assurance and Continuous Improvement here at Kyabra. And this is a great opportunity for continuous improvement, as Jessie and Coco were speaking about. And we were lucky enough at Kyabra to be successful in receiving a grant from the Queensland Family and Child Commission for our transition project for compliance with the Child Safe Organisations Act. So, which is why I'm joined by Vicky today, who works as an independent consultant, but is also my former Kyabra colleague. So we've both been working together on Kyabra's transition project. I'll just go on to the next slide. So as Charlotte mentioned, we're a medium-sized community-based organisation working in Brisbane, Moreton Bay, Sunshine Coast and Gympie. We currently have approximately 150 staff members. And we work in a way that we're committed to strengthening individual, family and community life by providing a range of services and programs. Specifically in the housing area, our services across our sites include homestay, and one of our services is called Keys to Early Intervention Services, so sustaining tenancies type services. We have supported accommodation services. In Brisbane, we have immediate housing response for individuals and couples. In our Sunshine Coast service at Nambour, we have a purpose-built shelter for women and children escaping domestic and family violence. And we also have a pilot program from our Caboolture office called Housing Connectors, which is looking at safe housing options for people who are fleeing from domestic and family violence. Just in terms of our other services, we have NDIS support services. In Brisbane, we're supporting over 200 NDIS participants at the moment across direct support, support coordination and specialist disability accommodation. We also have foster and kinship care services. So that's our Brisbane services as well, and includes recruitment, training and provision of ongoing support to foster and kinship carers. We have family, children and parenting support and early years services in Brisbane. And that includes play groups and free parenting programs. Our Brisbane services also include financial resilience programs. So that's financial conversations, support with bills, emergency relief, and information, education and referral. And we have a Richlands community centre where we offer some of our services from. So just over at Richlands, we have playgroups and our financial resilience services out of there. Some people might have heard of our Lighthouse Resources, which is our professional training, and at the Sunshine Coast, as well as the domestic and family violence shelter, we also have a mobile domestic and family violence service. So our approach is based on the strengths-based framework. We work across all of our programs, we work to facilitate sustainable change with the people that we work with. We're driven by social policy and social justice, and we work across an integrated model. So we have case managers that would work across housing services, foster and kinship care, and NDIS services. And at the Sunshine Coast, our case managers would work across domestic and family violence services and housing services. We have a reconciliation action plan working group at Kyabra that really supports our work in terms of looking at reconciliation activities and acknowledging important dates of significance. So they support us in acknowledging things like Sorry Day. We have activities around National Reconciliation Week and NAIDOC activities, and also National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Day. And our Reconciliation Action Plan working group are really active at Kyabra in terms of resourcing staff and supporting staff across those areas. In terms of existing compliance that we have in place, we have the Child and Youth Risk Management Strategy. We are compliant with human services quality standards across a range of our services. We're compliant with NDIS practice standards, with early years learning framework standards, and we're licensed to provide care, out-of-home care as well. And I think I'll hand over to Vicky now to continue.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, everyone, for the warm welcome. As Diane said, Kyabra was fortunate to receive a grant from the QFCC to implement the Child Safe Standards and Universal Principle and Reportable Conduct Scheme. And I was contracted to Kyabra. It's a 12-month project. So I started just prior to July. And so for that time, I'm going to sort of share what I've been doing in helping Kyabra to implement those, working really closely with Diane and the leadership team and a newly established working party at Kyabra. So you would have seen from the range of programs Kyabra delivers, we came under scope actually in October of this year because of their foster kinship care service and NDIS services. They were two of the service areas that came under scope in October. So working closely with those teams and services, we started looking at the self-assessment tool, which a QFCC has up on their website, which is a really important tool to download and to look at. And as we were looking through that, we decided to complete that for all of Kyabra services, given that it's an integrated model, as Diane said. So the case manages a number of workers. In fact, all the workers really work across a number of program areas. So it didn't make any sense to say, let's separate NDIS and foster kinship care from housing, from the other services. So we looked at that as a whole, which meant Kyabra really worked towards becoming compliant from the 1st of October and working towards compliance. It's a work in progress as a child safe entity. So in doing that self-assessment tool, if people aren't familiar with it, it steps you through their standards and the universal principle and how your organisation is really going against those. There's lots of indicators, and it is quite a in-depth process. So it did take some time to complete that. However, with knowledge of the service, as I was fortunate to have of Kyabra and work closely with the leadership team, it's not an impossible task. It's just really going through each of those standards and looking at your existing compliances, as Diane said, because Kyabra meets the child safe standards, particularly in all of the other compliances. The universal principle probably stood outside a little bit differently to that. So that was more of the work that has been done. So from that self-assessment tool, I developed up a Child Safe Organisations action plan and grouped the actions into 4 main themes that then sort of developed the action plan through. So for Kyabra, this will look different for other services, but for Kyabra, I'll step you through briefly each of those. So it was reviewing and updating the policies and procedures, reviewing and updating the code of conduct, promotion of cultural safety, and promotion of child safe culture. So all of the actions that we looked at really could come under one of those areas. Okay, jump to the next slide, Diane. So with reviewing and updating the policies and procedures, we look specifically at those that would be connected to children and the safety of children. So this isn't the comprehensive list of policies that Kyabra would have, I'd say close to probably 50 or 60 policies across the different programs and areas. But these particular ones we looked at really closely in terms of what they're currently saying Kyabra has in policy to protect the safety, cultural safety of children. I'm not going to go through each of them. You can see what they are up there. There's some, again, really good resources on the QFCC website around policies and which policies to be looking at as a starting point. For most of these, it was reviewing the policy. It was extending it in some case. So Kyabra had an existing child protection policy, and we looked at then extending that to child protection and wellbeing. So including in that policy some information about how Kyabra will be committed to the wellbeing of the safety of children, as well as, you know, protecting them. So we talked, you know, that harm prevention and risk management, looking at how do we actually look at preventing harm more strongly in that. So that was the list of policies there. We drafted a new policy for the Reportable Conduct Scheme. I'm not going to talk a lot in our presentation because Kyabra hasn't done a lot of work around that other than look at the information and draft a policy. Kyabra will become compliant, as all of you will, on the 1st of July next year for that, and more information we know will come to hand. But it is important to look at, you know, what your existing systems are around worker conduct. And how you might need to extend that. So for us, it was drafting that policy. Next slide. Yep. The code of conduct. Kyabra has had an existing code of conduct that all staff, board and volunteers had signed. I reviewed that code of conduct and we updated it to reflect the expectation around child safe and cultural safe practices explicitly. So really adding a little bit more in about what the expectations are of staff, board and volunteers around that. That was recently sent to all the staff, board members and volunteers to re-sign, well, to sign again, because it was a just slightly different code of conduct. And alongside of that, it was doing some sessions with staff around what was the difference, you know, what were they being asked to you know, to really look at around their conduct in the workplace. Promoting cultural safety was the third major area. Certainly the first two around policies and the code of conduct were fairly tangible tasks. Could look at reviewing those policies, changing them, reviewing the code of conduct, changing it. With promoting cultural safety and promoting child safe culture, these are much bigger pieces of work because we're looking at you know, organisational culture as much as the tangible things, you know, around what workers you know and do. Around cultural safety, primarily we're really looking for the RAP working group, as Diane mentioned, to be driving that around cultural safety. Kyabra has a reconciliation action plan and it's in its, I think, 4th or 5th iteration of that. So there's a you know, a really good group of people who are you know, really charged with that at the organisation. I looked at that plan with view to specifically inclusion of child safe practices within the RAP. At that time, it was a very comprehensive RAP, but actually making it again more explicit around what it meant in terms of child safe practices was important. The working party was tasked with developing a definition of cultural safety. Kyabra has reference to cultural safety. It has the, you know, the reconciliation action plan, but there was actually no specific definition of what cultural safety meant for the organisation. So that was a really important task to look at what Kyabra is saying it already does, what resources it already has around that, and then to actually draft that definition of cultural safety. And to do that, you know, to define that, I brought together some of the information I had from policy, what the reconciliation plan said, and kind of developed a bit of a working definition. The working party took that and did some consultation, you know, with the organisation, with community elders around does that fit for what Kyabra, you know, wants to be publicly saying around cultural safety. Came back and this definition now is included in policy. So we've just got on the next slide that definition. I'm not going to read it all out, but really importantly in that we wanted it to be a comprehensive definition of cultural safety and be able to be talking about that, you know, as an organisation and what that means. And, you know, as Coco and Jessie saying, it's really important that this is continuous improvement. So we don't have this definition and put it aside and go, let's just keep doing what we're doing. It's actually saying, how do we embed this into practice? The biggest, well, the one of the most significant changes, I think, in that cultural safety definition is the last item there around racism and unconscious bias. That was not explicit in any policies or the reconciliation action plan. So we looked at how do we make that explicit that we want to be doing that, and then all the conversation about how do we do that. Obviously, again, saying you're going to address racism and unconscious bias is an easy thing to say, but what's it going to look like and how are you actually going to do that as an organisation? So the RAP group and leadership are continuing to look at what's happening in that space around addressing particularly racism, unconscious bias in policy, in supervision, in organisational practices. Jump to the next slide. And the last area was around promoting child-safe culture. So the few things have happened around that. One of the really enjoyable pieces of work that I was able to do with the organisation is to bring together the leadership team and representatives from all of the teams at Kyabra to look at developing a charter of commitment to the safety and wellbeing of children. Again, this is something that the Commission does recommend and suggest organisations look at having a charter of commitment or some public statement around that you're saying you'll be around the safety and wellbeing of children. For Kyabra, again, there was a lot of implicit information throughout policy, throughout different program guidelines and what that meant. So as a group, we came together and I facilitated a workshop and looked at what existing policies say, what existing information there is in the organisation, and then we workshopped with that representative group how to kind of theme that and summarise that, and then what that will, how that will be portrayed back to staff, and they'll have opportunity to comment on that. So there was a draft created from that workshop that then went back out to all of the staff and board to have a look at, and came back and have now publicly, that is a public statement now. So that's on Kyabra's website. It's displayed in the organisation. So that's the Charter of Commitment, which is a new piece of work that we've done around this Child Safe Organisations Act project. And the next slide talks about the other things. So there's been a social media campaign, so putting up information on Kyabra's social media, Facebook, Instagram, etc. Some information really around what Kyabra is doing, but putting it out to Kyabra's networks, the importance of what a child safe entity means, who it covers, what it looks like. In essence, a really brief explanation of what Coco and Jessie were talking about, particularly to Kyabra's networks, including I think for staff, I've done information sessions in person or virtually with all the staff across the organisations. That was over 2 months. It was a number of teams to get across, but it was looking at what it meant for Kyabra as an organisation, but also really aware that a number of staff have involvement in informal groups and services, and that they will need to become child safe entities, which is the information I think is much harder for some of those groups to access, knowing that they do come under the Act and what they need to do. So saying to staff, here's a little bit of information if you're involved in the local soccer group or Scouts or one of those groups, that yes, they will be coming under scope most likely. I also reviewed staff training that is under the scope of the Act. So as the Commission was saying, what staff need to know is different depending on their role, but looking at staff training, particularly in the foster care space at the moment, and the NDIS space, what training that they currently receive and how to ensure that they've got the adequate training to to meet the requirements as a child safe entity in working with children, parents, foster carers, support workers, etc. And also reviewed the orientation training for all new staff and volunteers, and ensure that there's information on being a child safe entity in that orientation training for new staff. And in process at the moment, I'm developing with a training coordinator a new annual training that will be put up, a virtual training for all staff on Kyabra and child safe practices, and that will be reviewed annually post completion of this consultancy, but there'll be a working group that will continue to hold that space for continuous improvement around ensuring that staff know what being a child safe entity is all about. So that's a summary of what we've been doing. I know there'll be time for questions at the end, so we'll hold those for now. Thank you.
We've actually allotted the space now for Vicky and Diane to answer any questions before we meet our third guest speaker. So if anybody has any questions, you can use the raise your hand function or just pop it into the chat as well about maybe some of the points that Vicky raised. Any tips or tricks from Vicky. Otherwise we can move on. Just give a few people a few moments. It sounds like the self-assessment tool is a really good, really useful tool to utilise for people sort of wanting to get some true reflection of what their service needs. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. For us, yes, that certainly was really helpful too. And that was the first step, is really to access that self-assessment tool. And Diane and I worked together on completing that. So in terms of feedback from children, I've just seen a question there. I didn't directly get feedback from children, but certainly the staff that work with children. So there's playgroup, there's early years staff who, yes, and we've got an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff person in one of those roles. So in those playgroups, they were talking with parents and the children about the Charter of Commitment, what their feedback and ideas were around that. And also looked at how do we put this information to really child-friendly language that was really accessible.
Sally's just asked whether Kyabra considers all of their services to be a reportable entity under this scheme.
Yes, would be the short answer. You can't separate the services, and it's around worker conduct. So Kyabra has a couple of services specifically for children, but you could see most of them aren't specifically for children, but certainly children would come on site. In nearly all the sites at Kyabra. So it's really important that workers are all across what it means to be a child-safe entity and what reportable conduct's all about.
I think that's a key point from my understanding. If, the service may not be set up specifically for children, but children may come into contact with the service in some way or another. So
I can see that someone's asked to, will the standards be included in the HSQF or NDIS audits? My understanding is that they'll be included in HSQF audits going forward. So any audits that happen pretty much from now on, I think they'll be included in that version of the HSQS user guide.
Thank you, Diane. Just having a bit of a read of the chat. I don't want to miss anything. I noticed there was a question earlier on about whether the reportable conduct scheme will apply retrospectively. Does anybody from the QFCC or Vicky or Diane have any insights on that? Unless you've already answered.
Charlotte, was that the sports?
So there's a question in the chat, I think it's from Julie, who's asked whether the reportable conduct scheme will apply retrospectively.
Yeah, so watch this space would probably be my answer in terms of we're still getting some legal feedback around the stuff, so I wouldn't give it definitive answer.
For some people may or may not know that this was brought, I always get this wrong, this was brought forward. The compliance with the reportable conduct scheme was brought forward a whole year, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we will be devoting a bit more, a lot more of a focus on the reportable conduct scheme in the next webinar. So by then we will have more of a sort of an understanding of more intricate details of the scheme. So we encourage you to join us for that one. That'll be in the last week of February next year.
I might also jump in there as well. Yeah, completely agree with what Coco was saying. Watch this space. There's going to be some more guidance documents for reportable conduct scheme coming out soon. So yeah, like you were saying then, Charlotte, not for all organisations, it's been moved forward. For most of them, I'd say about half of, with that slide we had up before with the phasing, reportable conduct was originally like that as well, to kind of allow for some organisations to be compliant earlier than others. However, government came in to change that to make sure that we all have a prioritised stance of reportable conduct scheme, which we do welcome, but do also recognise that that is quite hectic to change the timing, hence why we will be getting out more resources. So stay tuned on our website with those things. And also to briefly address the HSQF question as well, the Commission's done a lot of work with the HSQF team as well. So yeah, their audits are also compliance ready for our side as well in regards to the 10 child safe standards. So those are very overlapping. So yeah, if you are HSQF compliant, you are most likely child safe standards and cultural safety, like universal principle compliant. But that doesn't mean that I would say to just do that audit and then that's it. But of course, continuing that work.
Yeah,
and things along those lines.
Yeah, I think probably the majority, if not more, I know of organisations who are working with children or offer those services are already doing a lot of the right things. It's just, so I guess this webinar is just to, reinforce your great work that you're doing and try not to panic and to just, have a look at the self-assessment tool and see if there's any gaps that, that you might need to address and go from there. And obviously the QFCC are really helpful in terms of advice and guidance that they can provide, and there's a lot of resources available on their site. I'll obviously the chat can keep going. Any questions that pop into your mind now, you feel free to keep using that space. But I would like to welcome our third guest speaker this morning, is Richard Stokes, who's the CEO of the Australian Boarding Schools Association. This association was set up to support boarding schools in their important work and train boarding staff in how best to make boarders' lives better. A bit of a tongue twister. So welcome to you, Richard. I know that you have some interesting insights to share with us about not only Queensland, but other jurisdictions that have brought in standards such as these previously.
Thanks, Charlotte, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. Do bring a slightly different perspective to lots of things because, I think many people will understand that boarding schools, and can I say that includes all of the boarding establishments that we've got across the country, from the independent schools that everybody thinks is the only sort of boarding school, to our state schools, to our hostels that house students who go to school as well. So we look after all of those. It's interesting, if we look back, that the Royal Commission was actually a bit of a mind-blowing moment for boarding schools because one of the findings that came out in that report, sadly, was that boarding schools were one of the most unsafe places for kids in Australia. Now, I've worked in boarding since 1980, and I know my kids weren't safe, but there were lots of things that we weren't doing really well. And I can be really honest, right down to the fact that when I first started working in boarding as a 19-year-old, one, I got no training, and two, I was looking after 100 boys all by myself. And as a 19-year-old, you'd think that might be a bit crazy, but look at where it got me. It got me to a situation where I set up an association to support boarding schools and to better make sure that we do some things that make boarders' lives better. And I know that's a bit of a catchphrase, but it's a really important framework that we work on across the country. I'm a Queenslander. I'm sitting in Brisbane today, and I've worked in boarding schools, both in South Australia in my early days, but more extensively through Queensland. So the change that I'm seeing in terms of this legislation is something that, to be honest, excites me. It's a great step in the right direction. I've watched other jurisdictions look at it in different fashions, but I think that, in fact, this legislation and the QFCC is a fabulous move to support kids who live away from home. And so as a residential service, as a boarding school, we actually look after kids, other people's kids, for more than 40 weeks a year. And you can imagine that that's quite an interesting space. And it does range from that small, mum and dad run boarding establishment in Cloncurry that might have 10 kids to the larger boarding schools that many people will know about. And it's interesting, that there's a misunderstanding about the people who go to boarding school across this country. Many people think it's only for rich kids. Let's be honest, it's actually because kids have to. And I say that, we have 76% of the kids in our boarding schools are rural and remote. They actually have to go away to high school, otherwise they don't have anywhere to go. And I emphasise that even more clearly when I look at the Torres Strait, because between that pointy bit of Queensland and New Guinea, in all those islands that are part of Queensland, there are 580 students who have to leave home to go to high school. Now, there's only one on-country boarding establishment in the Torres Strait on Thursday Island, and it has just under 100 beds. So there's still a lot of kids who are going to a lot of different places, and you can see why that's really important. Now, in schools, many of you will know that there's been child protection training for probably as long as I can remember. But, one of the things that's wrong in terms of boarding establishments was that that child protection training was very school oriented. And it's very different. I always say to people that we look after kids from the 3 till 9, not from the 9 till 3. And between 3 and 9, they sleep, they go to bed, they eat, they do all sorts of things. They go to the bathroom. They're things that supervisors need to know more about. And in fact, that was lacking and been one of the things that I've been really concerned about. So we've done a few things along the journey to try and make boarders' lives better and safer, including working with Standards Australia to develop a national boarding standard for schools and residences, which was published in 2015 and is in the process of being updated. As you'll know, the National Child Safe Standards and these regulations didn't exist, of course, back in 2015 and do now. So there'll be some strong reference to making sure that all of that state legislation that exists, and not only in Queensland but all the other states and territories as well, must be referenced. But that it's a tweak. The standard is a national minimum standard, whilst not compulsory, is in some places, and there is some discussion going on here in Queensland about how there would be a standard developed for boarding schools. Our state schools have to meet the national standard at the moment. The hostels are under pressure to meet the standard because of the funding arrangements that they get, particularly through the National Indigenous Australians Agency. And our non-state schools, there's a discussion going on and there's some work being done in that space. Okay, one of the things that I was really interesting to note was that the standard, back in 2015, we did pretty well because it spent it emphasises in many more ways that both boarders and parents and community need a voice. And it talks a number of times about making sure that they have an opportunity to contribute to the service, to help develop the service, complaints processes, the whole work. So that's been in place in that standard for a long time, which I think is really quite exciting. Okay, so why am I concerned about child protection training? Because I think boarding's different, and I think it's really important that we understand that when kids live away from home, we've got to make sure that we train our staff to do that. Many of our boarding staff were in that same situation as me many years ago, where there was no training given to the boarding staff. You'll be all right. You're really just babysitting kids, and of course that's not the case. It's a very critical part of the education. So we developed a course, all right, because I think that's the way to go, and so we actually have a boundary and child protection training course, and we call it Boundaries on Purpose, because one of the critical things that boarding staff need to understand is where their boundaries are in terms of what they need to do. We talk extensively about that concept about being friendly but not being their friends, because it's really important if you consider that those boarding staff are looking after kids in unusual circumstances. They're not in a classroom for only 50 minutes a day. They're actually there for the long haul, and that we need to make sure that they understand that those positive relationships that they develop with their boarders, there are boundaries around those so that they understand it. We provide base level duty of care training for all of our boarding staff. from a free induction course that over 1,000 people do a year, because that's how many new boarding staff we get, to quite extensive workshops where we develop that. And one of the critical things that we really emphasise strongly in that is an understanding of what grooming is about. And again, that's one of the things that's quite critical when it comes to child safety, and these wonderful standards that are here, is understanding the potential risks that kids can face. And grooming is a really a critical space when it comes to understanding boarding schools, because we're almost promoting a healthy environment for grooming to develop, and we don't want that to be the case. It's too easy for that to be the case, where staff live on campus, they can be single, they look after kids, they see them in all sorts of settings, and so we've worked really hard at developing that. We talk about taking kids in cars and the situations that they need to be smart in that space too. And we're in the process right now of developing a safer recruiting course, because one of the things that we actually have, and it's based on an understanding of where these standards go, it's a really clear understanding that we need to make sure that we check as carefully as we possibly can the people who are applying to work in our boarding facilities. It's not as easy as it sounds, to be honest, but even looking at gaps in people's employment is really important. I'm really excited about the universal principle, because I think that's a really important space too. And 5 years ago, we developed a First Nations course. And I think it's interesting because it's actually called Creating a Safe Cultural Environment for First Nations Boarders. And that emphasises just how important it is to do that. Lots of people have done that course, and we will be pushing it hard that they should do this certificate course to help maintain their understanding of where this standard is and what they need to do as part of that. We're also in the process of developing, and in fact I have a meeting this week, the first meeting of our First Nations Advisory Committee, where we've put together a committee of key First Nations people, most of whom are either Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders, who are going to guide our national board about the work that we should be doing as an association to best understand those needs of those kids. Okay, so that was a quick presentation of all of the sorts of things that we need to be doing in boarding schools. I consciously made it quick and easy because I think it's really important for you to understand that concept. And I'm, whilst I'm a teacher and I can do a slideshow too, I thought really the simple thing is it's really important to understand the big framework of what we are doing and how important it is that those people who look after the boarders in our care, so that's about 4,400 staff in boarding schools across Australia. There are 204 boarding establishments, most of which are in Queensland. So 56, when I say that, 56 of that 204 are in Queensland. So it's a really important space for us, but it's really important that those staff are well trained to understand what the requirements are. And so I know our schools are, to be honest, quite excited by this change, because they're spaces that they've been working in for a period of time, but now it's clearer and more precise. And so I'm open to questions if anybody has any. And thank you, Samantha. Lovely comment.
Thank you so much, Richard. Really wonderful to see all the work that the Australian Boarding Schools Association is doing in this space. And it's quite, I don't know if it's, but when you told me that you were looking after that many children when you'd first started at 19 years old, that was that's pretty mind-blowing how far
it's still mind-blowing, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's still mind-blowing. But the good thing is that boarding schools have moved forward now, and they'll actually always have more than one person on duty to make sure that they're sort of checking on each other. Those sort of things are really important. And it's probably more a 1 to 30 sort of ratio would be your maximum nowadays. And I think that's realistic. 1 to 100 is quite frightening as a 19-year-old untrained person. However, I did fall in love with boarding. So, that's where I am today.
Yeah, and you sort of, that's propelled you to do some fantastic work in this space.
Julie's question there is really interesting. I think that the concept about recruitment is a really interesting space for everyone to look at. And I know I talked to a couple of people at the QFCC about this too. Just that understanding of how to and that's why I say it's under development, because there's a bit of work to do here, but how to best do your checking to do the best job to look after kids, because that's our framework, and our focus should be always on that. And I think it's very important. And, one of the things that I'm conscious of, and I provide one of those referee checks, I guess, for a lot of schools, because I listen really carefully and see what's going on. But I think it's really important that everybody who has a recruitment process works hard at asking the right questions, and checking as much as you can what their previous experience has been, and potentially why they've left places. Because very often you'll find that there'll be little gaps in their employment. And I can think of some examples I've got where there are little gaps in the employment of a person because they weren't employed for a few months. Finding out why, I think, is a critical space too. Why is there a gap here? Did they have to leave that place for a purpose? Did they then come to this place without that even being checked? To me, they're the sorts of things that we need to do. And I think it's a very critical thing. How can we work hard to ensure that in all of the employment of people looking after children, and so accommodation, housing and residential services is pretty important, isn't it? To make sure that the people who are working in those spaces are the best possible choice that we can make to continue to make our kids' lives best and safest.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Richard or the QFCC or for Kyabra or Vicky? So we're finishing. I added a little bit of extra time to this webinar. We usually finish around now, but given all our guests this morning and such a big topic, I assigned a little bit more time. So we do have some time available, but as I went on about earlier, I will be sending a comprehensive email following this with the link to this webinar, so you can rewatch it again and follow up with the QFCC if you have any particular questions that you missed out on asking today. As I said, we do have the second webinar coming up in late February about focusing on the Reportable Conduct Scheme, and some resources will be sent once you register prior to that. We've got a few questions coming through. So Johan has said, what does compliance to the standards actually mean? So it seems more of a work in progress with action plans and so on. I don't know who would like to address that one.
Briefly jump in.
Sure.
And I fully understand that. And I think the word just generally of compliance, we've had a lot of conversations about, because compliance as a word kind of makes it very corporatized or black and white, when really it is that process of continuous improvement and journey. What I'd recommend for that, because we didn't really get to go into too much detail for that, more than happy to follow up and provide some further information around what that actually looks like. Something I would say is the self-assessment tool or our guidelines, not the quick reference guide, but our guidelines in particular does have some indicators of what compliance does actually look like, not in regards to, yes, this is a work in progress, things like that, because fully recognize, yeah, that is the case sometimes. However, when we look at the guidelines, it does give a lot of information into what that looks like. But to fully preface, compliance and what that looks like for each organisation probably will be slightly different depending on where you are in that journey of compliance. However, compliance, yeah, is partly of that work in progress, but it is full actions as well that is determined by your organisation at that level. I don't know if Coco, you had anything else you wanted to add to that? Yeah,
I will just add, yes. So in thinking about compliance, and we're talking about continuous improvement, we're not saying that by the first of what the date was, that you have to be compliant by that date. It's really just recognising that you've got a bit of work to undertake to meet compliance. So it's perhaps more about like setting those goals to what you would like to achieve over the month. So maybe the first month it's getting your policies, you're doing a bit of an audit. So you're looking at the self-assessment tool, doing the first round of audit in terms of what policy and practice you have in the procedures, and then identifying those gaps, then looking at perhaps standard 1, looking at your governance and what's happening in that space and how you're collecting child voice and things. So really just thinking about compliance over the next 12 months, how will you achieve those things?
And if I can just add, I think for Kyabra, how we've looked at compliance is Kyabra will become compliant under the Human Services Quality Framework. So that will be most likely the way that compliance will be looked at. And it will be then aligning those. That's what we've done, work around how do you align the child safe standards and the universal principle within those compliances in the HSQF to make sure when the auditor comes, it's clear how you're meeting those standards. So we have mapped those standards against the other compliances that Kyabra has to meet in order to say, yes, we've got this policy, it covers this framework, this framework, this framework. So there is work to do around that mapping. In terms of concrete terms, it's our understanding that if we, under that audit, we may be asked to show the self-assessment tool and the action plan. So there's a template for that, but we have also developed the action plan slightly differently to make sense for this organisation. So that's how Kyabra is currently looking at those compliances. Would you add anything, Diane?
No, I think you've covered it there, Vicky. Thank you.
Okay. Julie's asked, as a peak organisation, who is best to contact to support the community housing provider sector?
In terms of gathering information or meeting child safe standards, is that?
Julie's is here.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here if you
Julie.
want. And sorry, I am firing lots of questions in the chat there. There's so much to get across. And as the industry body that represents CHPs, we play a key role in disseminating and helping the Family and Child Commission to implement this. So just after a contact, so I can reach out and work with them.
I can't think off the top of my head who the portfolio lead is at the moment. I don't know whether Jessie can recall.
Take it offline, just drop an email.
Right, sounds great. Thanks, Julie.
Okay.
Sorry, I just noted that there are a couple of questions about scope. So just to clarify, services for children and the facilities under the supervision of that entity. If you are wanting to kind of find out more whether you fit in scope, have a look at Schedule 1 and the listed there about some of those definitions of where you might fit. And then if you're still stuck, feel free to send us a message and we'll try and unpack that a little bit further with our legal advisors that we have.
So there's a question coming through from Sally. Are you available, Sally, if you'd like to talk more about your question?
Right. Hi.
That might be easier. Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay. I wasn't expecting to come on camera. Anyway, I was just wondering because you've talked about this being included in HSQF, compliance moving forward. Is it going to be a similar thing with NERSH, like with the National Regulatory of Community Housing? Just curious to know if we're talking to them about this standards also being part of that compliance.
That's a very good question. I think we will take that back to the team just to cross-check that we get the right information for you.
Yeah, and I'd suggest having a chat with Terry Dean, the registrar in the Housing Department, who is the administrator of NERSH or on behalf of NERSH in the Queensland system.
Yeah, will do.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Sally. Okay, I can't see any questions that I have missed. I have popped a little link to a survey for today's webinar. It would be wonderful if you can take a couple of moments, very, very short, just to give your feedback on today's webinar. It also has the opportunity for you to give some sort of topics or some more information or areas that you would like to expand on further for the next webinar. So if you could take the time to fill out that survey, it's only 3 questions, I think, so that would be amazing. Okay, well, we have, I think, reached the end, and I wanted to take the time to thank everybody who has joined us today, in particular our very special guests, Coco and Jessie from the QFCC, Vicky Carrick from, well, I don't know how to class you, independent consultant, Vicky, I think. What was the name of your organisation?
My business is called Jacana Supervision and Consultancy.
That's right. Thank you. And to Diane Hughes from Kyabra, and to Richard Stokes from the Australian Boarding Schools Association. Thank you so much to everybody who came today. We are all doing great work, and it's so reassuring to see so many people logging on today to keep that conversation going. So again, if you've got any further questions, go through to inquiries at qfcc.org. Where are they?
qrd.gov.
Sorry, mind blank there. And again, I will be sending out as many resources as I can get my hands on in the email following this webinar. So thank you again to everybody. I really appreciate your time this morning. And I wish you a very safe holiday season. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Charlotte.